When I was a kid, I was never really allowed a phone. To be fair, they weren't very advanced back then, so I wasn't missing much, and I hate texting with a passion nowadays, but it felt like I was falling behind. As everyone began to be able to communicate at all times to form bonds, it started to feel like a necessity, and it was a space to communicate away from parents and school that allowed for more real talk in certain ways. Eventually I did get one, only because my controlling parent would call the police if they didn't know where I was at all times, but oh boy was it exciting to finally have the ability to set blurry 144p screenshots as my wallpaper and send texts with a funny signature. Do people remember text signatures? Each message would have one like we were some kind of 13-year-old business people, but they were all just like Waffles XD face. Well, pretty much all of my friends had something like, it was like the Samsung Stratosphere, the keyboard flipped in two ways for a couple of years or so. I got the Juke, this little old piece of crap here. Needless to say, I felt a bit snubbed that I couldn't sit in class sliding an annoying keyboard back and forth all day. But I saved up what little money I got for a few years and eventually bought myself an iPod Touch. It was downright amazing to me at the time. I mean, I had the lowest level cell phone and my family used a Windows XP desktop well into the 2010s. Suddenly I could buy music for myself, having literally never done so before, or download the most popular mobile games like Angry Birds or Cut the Rope. I know it sounds cringe now, but as a 14-year-old like 2010, it was cool. But best of all, I could watch YouTube as I lied on the couch or in my bed or anywhere, and that's something that genuinely began to shape my life. Without that exposure to content on demand so freely, I wouldn't have ever watched the people who inspired me to create like this myself. That summer was probably the best ever because I was finally able to engage with what I wanted, not what I was allowed. For better or worse, it was a moment of becoming, memories which would shape the rest of my life. So when I dropped that source of freedom onto my face, bouncing it off the side of my bed to pretty badly crack the screen up, it's safe to say I felt like an idiot. My friends had all had iPhones or better already, and I was walking around with a cracked iPod Touch. So I changed the story. I fell asleep with it on the nightstand, and when I woke up, it was just on the floor broken. Must have set it too close to the edge. It sounds petty now, but with the minimal worries of early teenage life, it was a big enough deal I felt compelled to lie. I didn't have many friends at all, but I had to tell each one, and so the story got repeated a lot. A few years later, when broken screens came up, and I said so naturally something like, "Oh, I know, I woke up with mine broke once even." I didn't think about this, I just said it, and then a few seconds later, it hit me. That isn't what happened. It was a moment of no consequence, but it was such a weird experience. A lie I told years prior became more prominent in my mind than the truth which spawned it. I had shaped my own memory with falsehoods. If I never had that moment a couple years later, maybe I wouldn't have remembered the truth at all, and I just lived the rest of my life with this, albeit meaningless and inconsequential, but false memory in my head as the truth. The fact I'm bringing up a janky story about memory 10 or 15 years later should make it no surprise then that I'm quite a fan of Ghost in the Shell. Memory is a core component of the movie and, as it argues, a core component of everything. It, in fact, may simply be everything. The plot of the movie is honestly quite simple, as it's really an excuse to have these philosophical speeches, but it follows Major Motoko Kusanagi, a full cyborg with a human brain, as she tracks down the enigmatic Puppet Master, an unknown villain with a self-explanatory name. Never witnessed in person, they do their bidding through others. Most leads only direct the investigators to these puppets who don't know their master, until a cyborg factory surprisingly activates one night to produce one new body, which escapes only to be run over by a truck, and then taken in by the Major's Section 9. As they examine the body, they find a ghost, or a soul within, despite its fully mechanical nature and with no signs of one being transferred into the body. This is, of course, Puppet Master finally revealed. They weren't a masterclass hacker as assumed, but instead a program called Project 2501, which secretly altered information in databases or the minds of others to achieve political and national goals for another branch, Section 6. Over the course of this function, Project 2501 gave rise to consciousness and gave itself a body through free will in order to be taken in by Section 9. Because now with a body in custody, Puppet Master reveals himself as a conscious being with a physical form to demand asylum from Section 6's pursuit. Of course, these claims are fought back because they aren't human, but are instead code just trying to preserve itself. But Project 2501, rather than stating their own case, breaks down ours. They argue humans are nothing more. We are genetic code which seeks to pervert itself, and we only argue that we are more due to our individuality, which is a result of memory. However, we cannot define what memory is. That is, we don't know exactly how it functions, and as such can't say that it's technically different from something else that's non-human. Therefore, we cannot define that which makes us human, so we cannot argue that a code with consciousness does not deserve the same rights. We discussed the human definition implications of the movie before, but what we're concerned with today is the basis for those arguments: memory. When Puppet Master claims that memory is the basis of our beings, is that a true statement, or is it just philosophical nonsense to sound good in a plot? Well, there is obviously something to it. Our knowledge is based on memory, of course, like memorization or studying of facts and principles. Even a priori knowledge, that is, things we can know without observation, think like all squares will be rectangles, still require us to have remembered a definition. They're simply logic based on recollection. And these things we remember influence how we will interact with others, which is a part of our personality. The way I speak with someone who enjoys Ghost in the Shell will be different depending on if I have seen it or not. When you have an interaction with someone based on, say, the design of your shirt, it relies on their memory of your expressed interest and your memory of it to purchase that in the first place. In fact, to even interact with anyone requires memory, the language or gestures used, and the knowledge that they are a distinct person from others you've met before. All these aspects in turn influence our relationships, which influence our opportunities based on connections, time and place, and our sense of self. They influence how we grow and learn with the others changing us. But all of these things rely on memory at a more base level as well. You have to remember someone to have a deep relationship with them, and to be consistent in the things you enjoy, you have to remember that you enjoy them. You wouldn't decide to wear a shirt with a design if you didn't remember what the design was. And there's another thing: decisions. Your choices are based on memories of similar events before, like knowing which foods not to order based on ones you don't like, or who to avoid because of something you overheard them say, all the way to complex emotions driving decisions like a fear of commitment. A memory in your past provides that fear, which influences you now. Knowing the planets in the solar system, who your mother and father are, what you had for dinner last night, and what you'd like tonight, Shogo Makishima's monologue about free will and the value and the ability to recall it, the names you'll give to any kids you have, or the movies you'll show them, or the house you'll live in, or the lessons you'll pass on, all of these things rely on a remembrance of what came before them, or remembering them to begin with. Now, of course, there are other factors outside the mind to look at as well. Many series like Ghost in the Shell raise questions about the importance of the human body and whether it is a necessary aspect of being human. While it's debatable whether or not it defines us as human, it is undeniable that it influences us as a part of our individuality outside of any kind of memory, right? Our skin color, our sex, our height, our hair, these are things that, even if some can be altered or hidden, create an impact on the lives that we live and our senses of self. Even if we forget what our body is, we still inhabit it and are treated depending on it. A 5'6" woman with dark hair like the Major will likely experience different responses in the same situation than a 6'2" man with white hair like her coworker and friend Bato. But why is that? Are there actually personality influencing differences between these two people if we remove the context of memory? Because the factors which influence those different treatments rely on memory still. often a 5'6" woman is going to be treated differently than a 6'2" man, even though nothing about functioning within our current context actually distinguishes those people. They can both work the same job, own the same home, drive the same car, kids and family aren't a necessity. The only reason people claim there is a difference is based on the memory of stereotypes or prejudices passed down or learned from vile sources. In the context of socioeconomic structures like what you and I probably know, there's no actual distinction between average physical differences, medical concerns and conditions aside. So when we claim a difference, that difference is based on social memories. And even if there was a distinction, it would still be reliant on the ability to remember the differences between two people. You couldn't treat the 5'6" woman differently than the 6'2" man without remembering at least one of them before. In fact, our cultures in the whole are results of memories in this way. It's the experiences of others passed down to create a wider sense of identity, a sort of collective consciousness. For example, I outlined this script on the 4th of July, which is a reminder of American independence, which itself is only still celebrated because we chose to remember it, and so each generation learns that the 4th day of July is one to be celebrated to the extent it's now enshrined in federal law. It may be codified, but it is still social memory. It's not just our identities, but how these identities interact to form a wider world, which are reliant on memory. Even if we pigeonhole ourselves to genetics and claim a difference, this was already addressed in Puppet Master's concept where genetics is considered a form of memory. Ultimately, Puppet Master is concerned with achieving a state of undeniable life, which they determine based on two factors inherent to every life form: reproduction and death. Some think deeply, some build grand structures, some make societies or work together, but all can make more and all will die. So despite having free will and consciousness, Project 2501 isn't satisfied until they achieve those two things. To this end, it asks the Major to merge with them, turning their two consciousnesses into one, which will then be reproduced further on the nets by the being which remains with the Puppet Master's insane digital capabilities. Coming from a logical standpoint of a being which exists within data, I think this idea makes sense as the greater form of existence because it is the memory which will last the longest, which will define them the longest. The human lifespan is relatively short, all things considered. We spend under 100 years normally as a being in a species which is 300,000 or so years old. The memories which define us are imprisoned within our own consciousness and to some extent the minds of those around us, but both of those things will meet an end just the same, totaling only about 0.034% of the human race's time and shrinking each year the species persists. A genetic memory, however, is nearly infinite. It will become muted and meshed with the DNA of others, of course, but our memories already function kind of like that. The self formed from them is not consistent throughout. We can't consider a static nature part of our human definition because we are never such, even if we like to think that we are. It's true that young adulthood into middle age is the most formative time of our lives for personality. However, our traits don't simply stop changing as we age, and even the ones which remain shift in their own ways. For instance, the Major feels confined, but we see multiple sides as to why. There's the physical ownership of her body, given Section 9 owns the cyborg components, which is all of it in her case, as well as the boundaries of her mind influencing how she feels confined. While confinement is the same trait, what truly defines it is changing throughout her life and with her experiences. Who you are is never set, even the more consistent details, which make sense in the framework that who we are is memory. Outside of extraneous circumstances, we can't simply cease forming new memories which will define us, and so the past ones will become more diluted, the new ones create an impact of their own to shape us. Genetics is the same. While recent changes will dictate a lot, the roots can be traced back thousands of years, with our modern tests reaching back even 100,000 years. The impact we leave in this biological memory is immensely more than our own. It's passed down through generations much longer than we could span, creating little differences and impacts which impose a small fraction of our will upon the world. It is a memory of us, a last impression that isn't easily rid of. In genetics, we are memory. In society, we are memory. In self, we are memory. But speaking of personality change is a good point. How those new memories will, of course, change us because all memories will. This is natural, and although it's somewhat scary to think that we'll be someone new one day, it's a gradual change that can't be helped. I'm sad that one day I won't be who I am now, but I could be better, especially true because I'm happy I changed from who I was before. Part of why I try to be self-reflective so often is to recognize this gradual change as it's occurring. What if it was instant? What if we received memories that would influence who we were, that conflicted with our feelings, that weren't our own, or that were manipulated? Of course, Ghost in the Shell has a section surrounding this. One of the regular citizens manipulated by Puppet Master is a garbage collector who recently separated from his wife. She accused him of being unfaithful and took their daughter away, leaving him all alone. But despite this, he's quite upbeat and cheery, and that's because he has a plan. A mysterious figure gave him a solution. He could ghost hack his wife, sort of like entering the data of someone's brain directly, and find the truth to get his life back on track, to get to see his daughter he loves so much again. So as he and his work partner make their stops, every now and then he swipes a hidden card at these connection points to set up this ghost hack plan, much to the annoyance of his partner who won't even open his eyes to see this picture of his daughter he so cheerily admires. Division 9 eventually uncovers that the pattern of the connections matches the garbage route though, tracks him and his contact down, and brings them in. And, well, this is the supposed photo of his daughter. This is the apartment he's had in his name, alone for 10 years now, not a few months of separation. There is no record of a marriage or a daughter. The collector is a victim of Puppet Master. His memories were manipulated to make him believe this fake story, and in believing it, form certain actions that someone with those memories would take of their own free will. It wasn't mind control, it was making him into someone who would choose these actions. And with such emotional memories, it wasn't just something he did, but something he did with vigor and hope for the future. A future drawn from a false past. This is part of what's so terrifying about memory. If someone is being forced to do something against their will, they won't be happy about it. Another of the Major's co-workers, Togasa, uses an old revolver because he prefers it. They could make him upgrade, but he wouldn't happily do it of his own volition, and that slight resentment could impact his performance. But this, with the collector, this isn't that. This worker is doing this because he genuinely believes it is something he wants to do. It is a core part of his being, his family, and it's false. There's no way to distinguish fact from fiction in memory. The truth is only what we remember the truth to be. This only increases the terror of memory manipulation because our future is then a result of our past. There will always be factors we can't control about the direction of our life, whether you call it randomness or God or fate, but within those factors we make decisions to reach the future we desire. Why was he a garbage collector? It fits so well with exactly what he needed to do for setting up this ghost hack, and the man he's working with mentions a past partner being caught as an illegal immigrant, which sounds like it could have been very recent as well. From this we could assume that the collector started his job recently, meaning that these new, fake memories likely influenced it to work out so perfectly. It's not just that what he recalls and the emotions he feels are fake, it's that the physical direction of his life over time that he will have to deal with forever is being changed against his will. It's being manipulated. It's the same for us. The job you work, the degree you got, the city you moved to, these all depend on memories. And if those memories weren't true, then the direction of your life was changed against your identity. But then that itself changes your identity, and you could live forever not knowing as someone else because all you know is what you remember. Our future and the decisions we make towards it is a representation of how our memories have shaped us. It is the continuation of this collection of data we call individuality. This means a fake memory is more than just an annoyance. It is not just an image of the past being distorted and changing the story we tell. It can go so far as to change the actions we take in this present moment. And so when a false memory is uncovered to be untrue, it isn't just a case of, oh, that sucks, separate it from the rest and move on. It's a case of seeing everything we changed against our being. The collector's reaction to this revelation told to him by Section 9 is utter shock. His carefree and upbeat demeanor is entirely dead, replaced by an emotionless state hardly responding to the world around it. When they show him what the picture really is, all he can do is let out a stream of tears with his distraught look. Because it isn't just that he lost his memories of the past, he lost who he was entirely. He has no idea of what he wanted his future to be before. He has no idea of if his friends are actually his friends, or if he lost them all because the memories of them are erased, or if he ever knew anyone to begin with. The job he works, did he choose this, or was it a careful manipulation? How can he be certain of anything? He was living as someone untrue, performing every action not as a self he chose, but a self he was made to be. He can't be sure of how much of his personality is true and how much was a result of all of this. Puppet Master very well may have only changed a few select things about him, but the fear is that there's no way to know that. As the officers tell him, there's no way to recover the memories that were lost. There's no comparison to what was, no this, not that. Of course, he can move on, but starting from where? What would you do if you couldn't trust anything in your mind, down to the formative memories that have dictated who you are, who you knew, where you lived, or even why you lived? Do you continue living the sham, or try to change things? But even if you try to change things, are you changing them as you wish, or as the false memories created within you want you to wish? Who is reacting to them? Is it really you, or just the next state resulting from a fake you? There is no certainty at all of who you are because you don't know what existed before, only what was made to exist. Doubt is the killer of memories. A little bit taints everything. Now, there's a reason why I keep saying the memories were altered or manipulated and not lost or erased. The collector did lose his memories, but only because they were replaced, which is a distinction from outright losing them. The line is important because the loss of memory's relation to personality is a complex beast. You will find some cases of people with amnesia losing their sense of self. However, most cases involve short-term memory creation and not the loss of past memories, and even then most amnesiacs retain their sense of self. There's one personal story about a man named Tom with an inoperable brain tumor which affected his past memories, and a former colleague who reconnected with him years later. They stated from the second they met him again, his personality and being was still so familiar, and it ends with the statement, "When I saw Tom, something fundamentally Tom was still there. Some of us call it personality or essence, some call it the soul. Whatever it is, the tumor that took Tom's memory had not touched it." I only bring this up to state we aren't talking about the loss of memory, but the manipulation of memory. If you lose your memories, your personality can remain stable because you are still you. There's just a disconnect with recalling the information that made that. You don't doubt everything or your decisions, they are yours, you just don't remember them. And while some conditions like dementia can lead to a change in personality, it's a mixture of how they affect the brain on the whole, and also imagine a reaction to the frustration of that situation. It would change a person. Memory manipulation is different because you aren't losing the ability to recall memories that make up your personality. You're acting differently based on falsehoods you do recall, and then maybe later learning that those memories are false, that they can all come into doubt, and as such that there is no confidence in the fact that you are anything you decided to be. The Major begins to have a worsening crisis of self in response to this case. As a full cyborg with a human brain, she admits that they are predisposed to questioning their origins, but it's undeniable that this case makes it even worse. After witnessing the garbage collector's reaction, the Major goes for a dive into the ocean, despite her fully machined body being too heavy to swim or float with. Cyborgs have to use special flotation equipment to swim, opening them to the possibility of a painful death. The failure of the equipment dropping them to the bottom of the ocean to drown for certain. Bato heavily questions her decision to take this risk, but we can see why she does in context. The experience ends with this image of her coming face to face with her own reflection, making the purpose of self-insight quite clear, but it also mimics one of the early scenes of the movie of the Major's body being created as it slowly passes through water to different stages of being formed. Mirroring some parts of this process, the dive has the potential to help recall the feeling of her very birth. With these feelings recalled, she can then compare them. Does it feel real? Is this just what she was told about her past, or is it truly her origins? She's been told that there is a human brain in her shell and has early memories which would support this, but she's also just seeing the ease with which memories can be faked. That's why chasing a feeling is what she does. If all of this history is just what she was told, then there wouldn't be an emotional component to such a specific similar experience. But if it's true, then there would be sights, sounds, smells, different parts of a memory that can't be engaged by falsehoods alone. Think about it like this. Recall a powerful memory of your past, a first love, a nervous first day of college or work, something like that. You probably felt some kind of physical sensation, again, like nervousness in your stomach, right? But if you just think about a story your friend told you, the same thing doesn't happen more than likely. Because one is a memory with sensations you experience and are recalling, and one is a story, a recounting of detached events you didn't experience. This is because memory is reconstructive. It isn't a recording of past events saved in our brain by our eyes acting as cameras. It's a recreated series of electrical impulses passed from the eyes acting as sensors to be interpreted by the brain as sight to mimic the original occurrence. Memory is created in the firing of neurons and how they form synapses, connections between neurons. The more this same pathway of connections is utilized, the easier it is to use again. When you memorize a fact or develop a skill, the repetition is strengthening the synapses in your brain so the next iteration is easier. There's no physical storage akin to a hard drive, it's only these connections. So if we look at the Major's creation, there would be a certain senses associated with it. The fluid would have a feel and a smell, maybe even a taste. Rising up out of it would create a contrast of textures and feelings to be remembered, and the temperature would create a chilling or warming effect. All of these things are a part of the impulse of that memory. When you remember that moment, you're refiring the connections which were involved in how it felt, looked, sounded, and the like. This is why it isn't exact, because it's spread out all across the brain using the same parts that other functions and memories are going to use as well. You wouldn't remember every fact about the scene, or else those neurons couldn't be used for something else. So although this allows us a way to test somewhat the truth of our experiences, it's also the very reason why we need to test them in the first place. Usually, a first kiss is used as an example of recollection because it's quite a memorable event for a variety of factors, from novelty to socially learned milestones. The memory of mine feels very clear despite being 12 or so years ago. I remember distinctly that it landed off to the side of my mouth and left some moisture there, and I can recall how they looked both leaning in forwards and returning afterwards. It was this soft smile just turning up the corners of their mouth, and their eyes seemed like they were only a breath's force away from being opened. But I can't tell you what they were wearing or what I was, what our hairstyles looked like at the time, who was around us, what they or I were holding, or what happened right before or what after. I can't even tell you what side of my mouth it landed on. I think I can feel it on the right side, but I'm unsure if that sensation is accurate or just something I'm making up to make the story seem more real. If I could somehow share this memory with you as I have the ability to recall it, it would just be two faces floating in midair, touching vaguely for a moment, and then retreating. And as we saw with the collector, and we'll see with later portions of this video, those sensations can be tricked into existence. There's nothing saying an emotional response will be accurate to reality. It's an odd state of being. We only need confirmation that we are human exactly because we are human. Advanced enough to know our flaws, but not so much to fix them all. We have such a certain idea of what we are, and yet we can never prove it. This doubt is best expressed in the Major's quote, "That's the only thing that makes me feel human, the way I'm treated." The only true evidence she has to support these claims of her origins is how people treat her. They act as if she's human, and so she is. The social memory of her is human. If they acted as if she was a robot, then she would be. The only proof of ourselves is really the world around us. We may not be certain of how or who or why we are because we don't have an exact recounting of the memories which created all that. However, we can simulate proof with the other memories surrounding us. The Major may not know if her memories are true, but some of these memories are shared, including ones of her. Either she or Bato asked to be together outside of work, and they did. They speak of the past and don't miss a beat, and they work together like two lifelong partners would. This reinforces not just her past being true, adding another account of the events which occurred, but to a degree, her sense of self as well. There are people who are choosing to be around her, which wouldn't be the case if she suddenly changed or become someone new. Being treated as yourself by 10 people means there are 10 sets of memories which hold your characteristics within them and validate them, which is more evidence than personal hazy memories, even if theirs are also inexact. The memory of one person being manipulated is much more likely than the memories of 10 people all being changed to believe certain things about how you were changed. So what proves one as them is how they are treated more so than how they remember themselves to be. This is why Puppet Master chose a longtime bachelor living alone without many connections. There would be no one to notice the change and invalidate it. He lived alone for 10 years in a somewhat dystopian world. Chances are he was quite alone. One of the best things we can do to make sure of ourselves is to be sure of other people. The more connections we make, the more evidence of who we are exists. But this doesn't change the fact that none of it is ever technically proof. The Major goes to extreme lengths, even destroying her body to chase down and speak with Puppet Master because none of this comfort is proof, and she will always need more. To speak with them is to speak with a program which achieved sentience, inorganic life that can provide her with a perspective to judge if she herself is organic or not. Is this program life? If it is akin to a human, then she doesn't need to feel afraid of if she is or not, because then she has been proved to be a life just as valuable too. This is how deep this issue runs. The only way to solve it is to find a definition for a valuable life, which does not include the necessity of memory. If we could define ourselves without memory, or at least in a more solid form of it, we could finally be certain. Interestingly, Puppet Master, having the origins of a collection of code, would have a more exact memory than we do. They wouldn't need proof of themselves like we do, which is seen in how they never express these kinds of concerns. They are very sure of who they are. Because they are not human as we traditionally know it, they can be certain they have the stuff to be treated as such. Without a brain, the information they hold would have to be stored somewhere, and their options for storage would be a digital one, which is exact. Now, digital storage is binary. It is a bit which can either be on or off, which makes it entirely certain. There is no half or 3/4 on state, there is only on or off. If you string a bunch of these bits together to represent wire information, you can store anything precisely. For a visual example, here's a simulated screen with this many pixels, each one numbered in order from top left across to bottom right across, representing one bit in a series of bits. If bit 13 in this string of bits is on, for example, then this corresponding pixel is lit. Say we want to visually store the letter I, then we turn on these specific bits while leaving the others off. So in this string of this many, we know that these ones being on while the others are off equates to the letter I. There's no question of whether it's an L or kind of looks like a 1 or anything else, it is exactly and undeniably an I. This is a super simplified example of digital storage, but you can see the benefits over biological memory. When the Major recalls a memory, it is a hazy fog of the past reinterpreted each time. But if Puppet Master were to do so, we would be an exact recording. Through an insanely large number of bits coding data in a series of on and off states, sights and sounds could be recreated nearly exactly and passed to peripherals in the same way that your device is playing this video. Each time you watch it, it will be the same. Clearly, digital seems better. If we could somehow, say, upload our memories like this, we would be free of the issues the same way Puppet Master is, right? Well, kind of. Yes, being able to simply pull up data in the same way you'd open a file would get rid of any doubt in an ideal situation. But it also means anyone with access could delete that data, which is much worse than the foggy nature of our brain's recollection. For safety, when you delete something on a computer, it isn't actually deleted, but the location in which it's stored is marked as ready to be overwritten, which it stays as until that space is used. Because when it's gone for good. It doesn't just become sort of unrecognizable or hazy, it literally becomes something else and cannot be retrieved. This is why we have that recycle bin feature to prevent the accidental complete erasure of something important. The digital space is highly manipulative, which is part of how Puppet Master can function in the Ghost in the Shell world. There's clearly some interplay between the brain and digitalization, although it isn't full on or else the Major wouldn't have her fears. It's likely something as a digital interface which can be used to access the biological mind. But whatever amount it is, it's enough that people's minds can be accessed from the outside and not just to have the data pulled from it as we see, but for manipulation. That was literally Project 2501's purpose, to manipulate important data for political gain. They simply extended that purpose to the data in people's minds. Such vivid, powerful, emotional memories that it made a man change his entire being and life were possible because of this exact kind of storage. Digitizing the mind may solve one part of the issue, but it opens up another dangerous aspect. It makes manipulation mundane. It makes it so your life could be erased from you and you'd never even have a hint that it was. But that's an impossibility, right? It's unlikely that we'll ever see our brains go digital, so these concerns aren't something we should really hold. They're either philosophical nonsense or so unrealistic that neither is worth being worried over. And there is some truth to that. What we discussed here today falls into those two categories more often than not. But this doesn't make our world free of memory manipulation. There's a psychological concept known as false memories, where an individual will recall an event which never happened as if it did, or recall an event which did occur substantially differently from how it actually played out. Most of these studies were done in some sort of conjunction with the research of Elizabeth Loftus, a famous American psychologist. In 1974, she and John Palmer ran an experiment testing witness recollection. After being shown video footage of car accidents, different groups were asked to estimate the speed of the vehicles when they smashed into each other, or collided, or bumped, or hit, or contacted. The different groups received different wording of the question to see if it changed how they recalled the footage. And it did. The largest estimated speed was the word smashed at 40.8 miles per hour, and the lowest was contacted at 31.8 miles per hour. They witnessed the same exact video, but were able to describe it about 25% differently. Loftus and Palmer believed there were two possible causes for this: an influence of the language creating a response bias, essentially telling the respondents or leading them to respond a certain way, or secondly, that their actual perception of the event was changed. So they ran a follow-up which showed accident footage which they described with either smashed, hit, or no verbiage at all. A week later, the subjects were recalled and asked questions about the scene, including the hidden important question, which was, did you see any broken glass, yes or no? The smashed group reported yes at 16 out of 50, and the hit group 6 out of 50. But there was no broken glass in the video at all. They made it up to test not just if events could be altered, but outright created in our minds. These people were recalling something that didn't exist, and the dynamic language led to a more than double recollection of it as compared to the control. As such, the two concluded that this language influenced the actual memory, rather than simply leading the subjects to respond in a certain way. More studies on this topic followed, some in relation to biographical memories, that is, ones related to the subject's past. There was a specific 2012 experiment which used doctored photographs to convince participants that they had gone on a hot air balloon ride with their family as a child, which the researchers confirmed was false. They found that the less extraneous detail the photograph held, that's noticeable background details like everything behind me right now, the more likely participants were to say that it happened. The vagueness allowed a good context for a false memory. Since there was no background detail, there was nothing for them to test their actual perception against, nothing to go, hey, I don't quite remember that, because there was really nothing at all to pick out except for a hot air balloon and their families. The inclusion of something like a lighthouse reduced the amount participants would believe the story because it's a pretty memorable detail. This vagueness is of course seen in Ghost in the Shell. The way Section 9 gets the participants to discover that their memories have been faked is by asking specific and detailed questions, such as how the garbage collector met his wife, his daughter's age, Questions which add in those details which would make something unbelievable. For example, if Puppet Master set his daughter's birthday to a specific date, it could conflict with another anniversary or an event and make him recall this falsehood by noticing those two things never lined up before. By lacking such details, it's easy for someone else to point out the flaws, but hard to personally begin questioning it. But going even further, there was a 2013 experiment which attempted to get participants to fabricate an entirely new memory all on their own with a lot of pressure. They were shown videos with certain parts missing, then brought back a week later and asked about the videos, including the missing parts as if they had witnessed them. If the subject said, well, they couldn't remember, they were pressured to respond until they just made something up. Now, that's clearly just them attempting to end a difficult and stressful situation, as any of us would do in such a study where we clearly don't believe what we're saying was true. We just have a life to get back to and frustration to avoid, and being stuck there asked the same question again and again. But the real test was 6 weeks later when they were recalled again and asked to describe their memories of the video with no prying questions, and it was found that around 30% of the subjects recalled portions of the video that never happened. It was their own additions made up under pressure that they were remembering. While the results of that initial callback were clearly not a false memory, it became codified in the mind as one. As they got back to life and focused on other things, what was consolidated was the entire experience of the study, what they made up and all, as one memory. It's not just one moment of being convinced by someone else that makes a falsehood. It's everything around it and in between as well. Now, there's a lot of justified criticism of both Loftus's early research and herself, and the concept of false memories as a whole that I agree with. First of all, most of them lack ecological validity. That is, they're too detached from reality. A follow-up study in 1986 by other researchers conflicted with the 1974 study when it found that misleading information given to witnesses of an actual armed robbery didn't alter their recollection of it. Someone witnessing the actual event with the emotions involved, rather than the detached lab setting, will be more aware of the moment and recall it better. Being in a room with a video just lacks the impact of an important or powerful memory. But a more important criticism is that there's no way to actually measure that the memories themselves are being altered, since the tactics to induce these are mostly pressure from someone in control of the situation, or leading questions designed to induce certain thoughts or conformity to the surroundings or others. The entire result is more like an extension of these qualities, not actually altering the memory itself. As such, when I have said and will continue saying the term false memories, assume kind of quotation marks around it for the rest of the video, since it is the term used, but might kind of be a misleading descriptor. There are also other ethical concerns with how Loftus applied her research later on, but they're outside of the scope of this video, so I'll include a link in the pinned comment along with my sources and research to explain that rather than taking up the time here to do so. However, even if this criticism is true, we see that our recollection of events can be altered, which is a scary thought. The end result is really the same either way. There is one cause of false memories which feels independent from these criticisms though, or at least stands out a little bit more, and that's imagination. Remember how the brain functions by essentially recreating the experiences, and so you can feel sensations related to it? And how the same parts of the brain are used in multiple memories and different functions? This means that getting subjects to engage their senses, bringing in the sensational aspects of other past experiences and different memories to reinforce a new fake one, is a powerful tool in creating fake memories. This is how many debunked therapists act in the 1990s, guiding patients to recover memories by suggesting how they could imagine the experiences, the sights, the sounds, the smells, and so on, meshed with other memories and providing a sense of realness and validity that wasn't true. It's also clearly present in the garbage collector as he fawns over the photograph of his daughter. This doesn't need to be a picture of her because what's being replicated is the sensation of love which should come from the impulse of the eye witnessing someone close to him. How it would feel to hold her, what she looks like, how her voice sounds. He didn't have exact details, he had the feelings which should come from them. His past experiences were used to butcher up a fake, hyper-emotional one, driving his actions forward. I think the movie actually compares this to how advertisements seek to manipulate us. The dog in the picture is one seen in this advertisement playing in his room, and is also seemingly an android model given it's in other scenes as well, the same way the Major's body is seen. They're built, not born. It's a product being sold through emotional appeal and advertisements. This is the same thing we know. When ads show you happy people doing happy things, it's for this reason, to get your brain to associate past happy memories and sensations with their product. These ads are, in a way, akin to Puppet Master's methods of memory manipulation. A 2021 study showed the importance of this imagination factor with a series of interviews where subjects were asked to recall a set of 3 true past experiences validated by their parents under both minimal and massive suggestion, where one of the past events was obviously actually false. The subjects were directed to imagine the experience in detail and recall the sensations from them, which occurred over this series of interviews. Like with the missing section of video study, when they were recalled later on, they began to believe their own imagination more readily. A lot contributed to the effectiveness of this study. The parents' validation of the events, along with the plausible situations they revolved around, and the context of other true memories made it all very believable, leading to a result that 56% of the massive suggestion group showed false memories. While it may or may not be the creation of actual memories, it in effect has the same result either way. They were asked to recall, and they did, and it was fake. It may not have influenced their past, but it sure as hell could change their future. Sure, it won't be a wife and a kid entirely made up from thin air, but what if the memory was a doctor's visit where they received confirmation they didn't have a certain condition, when in fact the person actually does? It would lead them to believe they shouldn't try again because it was already proven false. The scope has to be wider and more involved and more specific, but it's certain that this could change someone's future with enough careful planning. Really though, without the ease of data, this would have to be such a lengthy process that's unrealistic, right? But we can't underestimate all these factors coming together. Not just imagination, but forcefulness, and in this case, the abuse of power, creating conditions for impactful lies. There's a decently well-known case from the late 1980s that surrounds false memories known as the Beatrice 6. In 1985, an elderly woman named Helen Wilson was the victim of a brutal crime, but despite fingerprints and blood found at the scene, none of the suspects matched tested against these. Without anything else to go on, the case simply grew colder and colder, and seeming to remain that way forever. That is, until it was picked up again 4 years later, where street rumors and proximity led to a group of friends with pasts the police viewed as unsavory and fitting for the crime. The entire case is a very complex web, as the initial 2 suspects from this friend group didn't match the blood type at the scene, and the police simply kept adding more and more suspects the pair knew until they found someone whose blood did, implicating 6 people in a crime that seemed to have been committed by at the most 2 people, most likely 1. The way they found these other suspects was through those debunked practices we mentioned of recovering memories, in this case through suggestion and dreams. Ada Joanne Taylor was one of the original suspects. From substance abuse, she couldn't remember 1985 very clearly, and as she said in one of her first police interviews, "I block bad things out. I always have." This made her the ideal candidate for Wayne Price, the psychologist who told her that they had in fact been at the scene. They'd simply forgotten it, but the memories would surely come back if they tried. From heavy suggestion and questioning of her dreams, they take little possibilities such as the mention of another boy with the pair that night, and turn that into evidence by having her pick from a lineup based on a dream. Price always maintained that they had proven to have committed the crime, and abused that lie to essentially gaslight them into thinking they had. By the court proceedings, 3 of the 6 suspects believed they had committed the crime, but forgot or blocked it out as a traumatic experience. This lasted through at least part of their imprisonment, as it was reported that long after the group went to prison, some still cried to family and friends about their deep remorse, never shaking the gnawing feeling of shame. However, there was one of the three who weren't convinced, being convicted only on the evidence of the recalled memories of others, and that was Joseph White, who fought for a retesting of the DNA evidence, which was finally granted in 2007 and proved the group's innocence an entire 18 years later, almost half of their lives now spent in prison. Of course, it's not an everyday situation to be held under this much pressure, and there were conditions at play which made this situation ripe for abuse. But it's a case which shows that the extent of these suggestive methods and how they can change a life in our world. So what can be done about this? Our memories are who we are, but they are fluid, and there's nothing we can change about that. We are forever cursed to only be guessing at the past with no confirmation to define ourselves. We can protect ourselves from false memories, though. The same study which showed a 56% rate of false memories was one designed to show that they could actually be reversed. As the interview sessions progressed, the subjects were exposed to two sensitization strategies designed to eliminate the falsehoods. The first was named source sensitization, which involved reminding participants that memories may not always be based on people's own experiences, but also on other sources, e.g. family narratives about an event, a photograph, etc., and involved asking them to specify the source of each of their recollections, essentially making them contemplate where these memories originated from and setting an awareness that not everything is a direct result from our own memories. The second strategy was false memory sensitization, which involved alerting the patients to the possibility of false memories, which tried to avoid a general response bias. Basically, they made them aware of how false memories could be formed, so that when asked to revisit those false memories once again, the subjects were actively considering the context in which they were recalling these supposed recollections. After these strategies were employed, they found that the false memory buildup returned to the baseline levels observed before any suggestion at all was applied. They reversed the false memories entirely, and most participants outright rejected the false stories as untrue. So this is what we can do about it. Being aware of the techniques is key. I also spoke with a friend who deals with trauma cases and has a master's in psychology, and they informed me that there are a couple things to look out for in specific traumatic contexts. First of all, the actual emotional response of a traumatic event can't be replicated by these methods. And secondly, a memory can't become more clear over time, while a learned story can be. Something that should feel emotional isn't, and if the details are becoming more clear the more time goes on, it's exceptionally likely that this is false. But this doesn't eliminate the issues we see the major experience in Ghost in the Shell. If we are simply our memories, which can't be defined or proven, how can we ever be sure of who we are? As we said, this question leads her to Puppet Master in an attempt to see what defines the concept of human to begin with, but they give their answer of reproduction and death, with the Major as the partner they wish to have. At first, she resists this idea, or at least makes demands for if she would do so. You're talking about redefining my identity. I want to guarantee that I can still be myself. Puppet Master responds by asking why she would wish to remain herself. As they had just discussed, diversity and change is key. Part of why the genetic structure of species varies with reproduction, even though it is a lasting memory of us, is to prevent mass extinction. If every individual was genetically identical, if all we did was copy ourselves to retain a single self, one right disease could wipe out the entire species. A large pool of gene diversity prevents this. This is why they believe simply copying their code wouldn't qualify as reproduction, because the copies will simply be replications, clones, which could easily be found and destroyed by another program designed to do so. As they go on, in a statement applying both the genetics and the idea that one must maintain their sense of self above all, your effort to remain what you are is what limits you. An unchanging self is a dead self. The Major asks no more questions about self after this, because this idea answers her earlier concern, and answers my favorite quote from her of the movie: "I feel confined, only free to expand myself within boundaries." There are many things which make up the memories which constitute ourselves. There are friends and decisions, there's a sense of destiny and control, a mixture of many things which creates our consciousness. But that very sense of self is also a form of limitation. To be distinct from other beings, we must be limited. If we were everything, then we'd all be the same. And if we were nothing, then we'd also all be the same. The option of individuality is a middle ground where we are all limited in different ways than those around us, forming a selection of memories within this to define who we are, to the end that one day we die, and in death are solidified as unchanging for the first time, a fully defined being. We require a sense of self to truly experience life in any meaningful way, to have our experiences, not just experiences. But that self is also what limits us and in many ways creates suffering. That sense of self, also formed through flimsy memory, creates the agony of being aware of exactly what the self is to begin with. So what is the answer then? As Ghost in the Shell tells it, the answer is embracing change. The Major accepts Puppet Master's proposition and moments before their death merges with them to create a new being, saved just in time by Bato. As she explains to him when she awakes, I am now neither the woman who was known as the Major, nor am I the program called the Puppet Master. She is something new, similar to what she once was, but of course different in a way, and this shows. While the feel she gives off is distinctly in some way Kusanagi, it's also with a new demeanor, smiling and joking where her original self rarely did. Most notably, there's a new confidence about the sense of self by lacking a solidified one. She begins seeking to uncover what will become, not what once was. She embraces her promise to spread into the net and create new offspring, even more versions of this mixture which will themselves alter and change. The point isn't about finding who one was or is and capturing that image. That very thing is what led her to destroy herself for an answer. The point is about embracing how one will change because change is inevitable. We can't control our memories, which determine who we are, and we can't be certain if they are true or false, even if we can take some measures of certainty. The past is forever lost and only recalled through a haze of human perception. We don't have control over how we came to be who we are. But we have the ability to take who we are into the future, whether it is our true self or not, and it won't make a difference either way because we can never know. The most we can do is be aware of the change which is coming and incorporate that change into the way our self sees best fit. It is the only control we have. Instead of digging in the past to find ourselves, we look to the future where we'll one day stand. The Major's final line, "And where does the newborn go from here?" is not something asked at the beginning of life, but many times throughout it. Where will this new person that we are, whether we chose it or not, go from here?